The holiday mail carrier's last route, a heartwarming Christmas sleep story of a life's work. The morning light on Christmas Eve came late and soft, filtered through clouds that promised snow before nightfall. Henry Whitmore stood in the sorting room of the Millbrook post office, his hands moving with the practiced ease of 4 decades sliding envelopes and small packages into the leather bag that had molded itself to his left shoulder like a faithful companion. The bag was old, worn smooth in places, darkened by years of weather and work. He had requested this particular bag on his first day, and it had never left his side since. Round him, the usual morning sounds of the post office hummed and clinked. The rumble of mail carts, the snap of rubber bands around bundled letters, the soft conversations of his fellow carriers preparing for their own routes. But today, these familiar sounds seemed softer somehow, as if the building itself understood that this was Henry's last morning among them. "Going to miss seeing that face of yours every morning," Henry called out Patricia from the next sorting station. She had started 20 years after him, but had become one of his dearest friends. Someone who understood the particular rhythm of this work, the strange intimacy of knowing a neighborhood through its mail. Henry looked up and offered her a smile, the kind that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'll miss the company," he said simply, "though I can't say I'll miss the alarm clock." She laughed, and the sound carried warmth through the cold morning air of the sorting room. Others began to gather, carriers who had worked alongside him, supervisors who had long since stopped supervising him because Henry needed no oversight. He knew his route better than he knew the lines on his own hands. There were gifts, small and thoughtful, a new pair of gloves, hay thermos engraved with his name, a photo of the entire staff taken last summer at the company picnic. He accepted each with quiet gratitude, his throat tightening with an emotion he had not quite expected to feel so strongly. "You've been the heart of this place," said Tom, the postmaster, shaking Henry's hand with genuine feeling. 40 years without a single complaint. That's something rare. That's something special. Henry nodded, not trusting himself to speak just then. He secured the last bundle of holiday cards into his bag, felt the satisfying weight settle against his hip. This weight had been his companion through every season, every year. T knew exactly how it would shift as he walked, how it would lighten with each delivery, how by the end of the route it would feel almost like nothing at all, just the leather and the lingering smell of paper. The cold air hit him as he pushed through the post office doors, sharp and clean. He drew it deep into his lungs, feeling it wake something ancient and alert inside him. Sky was pearl gray, holding the promise of snow within its soft expanse. His breath made small clouds in front of his face as he began walking toward Maple Street, where his route had always begun, where it would end today for the final time. His boots made a satisfying crunch against a light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight. The sound was rhythmic, meditative. How many millions of steps had he taken on these sidewalks? How many mornings had begun exactly like this, with the weight of the mail bag and the cold air and the quiet anticipation of the day ahead? The neighborhood was still waking. A few houses showed lights in their windows, golden and warm against the gray morning. Wreaths hung on doors, some simple and traditional, others elaborate, with ribbons and ornaments that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. Henry had watched these decorations evolve over the years, had seen tastes change and then circle back again, had noted which families put their decorations up the day after Thanksgiving and which waited until the week of Christmas itself. He approached the first house on Maple Street, the Henderson's place, and pulled out their small stack of cards. The mailbox opened with a metallic squeak that he had heard so many times it had become almost musical to him. He slid the envelopes inside and closed it with a gentle click. The sound resonated in the quiet morning, a small ceremony of completion. 3 houses down, he encountered his old adversary. The garden gnome stood in the front yard of the Morrison house, sparsely dusted with snow, its painted face locked in what Henry had always considered an unnecessarily stern expression. For reasons he had never fully understood, this particular gnome had bothered him from his very first week on the route. Perhaps it was the judgmental set of his ceramic eyebrows, or the way its fishing pole seemed to point accusingly at whoever passed by. Over the years, his feeling about the gnome had evolved from genuine annoyance to a kind of fond exasperation, and then finally into a silent, ongoing feud that he found privately amusing. "Still here, I see," Henry murmured to the gnome as he approached the Morrison mailbox, still judging the quality of everyone's mail delivery. The gnome, predictably, said nothing. Its painted eyes stared ahead with ceramic certainty. "I'll have you know, I've delivered to this house without error for 40 years, Henry continued in a low voice, aware that he was talking to a lawn ornament, but not particularly caring. "Not once did I put mail in the wrong box. Not once did I miss a delivery. You, meanwhile, have stood there doing absolutely nothing productive." He placed the Morrisons' holiday cards in their box with extra care, as if to prove his point to the silent ceramic witness. The gnome remained unimpressed. "Merry Christmas to you too," Henry said, moving on. He found himself smiling, despite the cold, despite the weight of the day's significance. The gnome had been part of his route for so long that he realized, with some surprise, that he would actually miss their one-sided exchanges. The morning brightened slightly as he continued down the street, though the sun remained hidden behind the thick cloud cover. More lights began appearing in windows. He could smell wood smoke from chimneys, that particular scent of winter mornings that mixed with the clean coldness of the air. Someone was baking, and the sweet smell of cinnamon drifted from the Sullivan house. Mrs. Sullivan had always been an early riser, and Henry had smelled her baking on countless mornings over the years. The rhythm of the route settled into his bones. Walk, reach into the bag, sort the right mail, approach the box, deliver, move on. It was a dance he could have performed in his sleep, and sometimes, in dreams, he did. His hands knew which houses had tricky mailbox latches, which ones squeaked, which ones were positioned too high or too low for comfort. Every detail had been learned and stored away, becoming part of the vast map of knowledge he carried in his mind. By the time he reached the end of Maple Street, the neighborhood had fully awakened. Children's voices carried from inside houses, excited about Christmas Eve. He saw a young boy pressing his face against a window, watching the snow that had begun to fall more steadily now, fat flakes drifting down in lazy spirals. Henry paused at the corner where Maple Street met Birch Avenue, the natural transition point in his route. Here stood the old oak tree that had been ancient when he started this job and seemed determined to outlast him. Its bare branches reached up into the gray sky like dark lightning frozen in place. He had rested against this tree on hot summer days, had watched it change through every season, had seen children climb its lower branches and lovers carve their initials into its bark. He set his bag down for a moment, giving his shoulder a rest, and simply looked at the neighborhood spread before him. From this vantage point, he could see a dozen houses, each one familiar, each one holding stories he had been privileged to witness through the mail he delivered. Birth announcements and wedding invitations, college acceptance letters and postcards from distant places, bills and catalogs, and handwritten notes from grandmothers. His legs ached in the comfortable way of muscles that had performed the same task for so long they had become perfectly adapted to it. He knew every crack in these sidewalks, every place where the concrete had heaved slightly from tree roots, every spot where ice liked to form in winter. 40 years of walking had written this route into his body, had made it as familiar as his own home. A car passed slowly, and the driver waved. Henry waved back, recognizing Mrs. Chen from Sycamore Lane. She had been one of his deliveries for 30 years, since she and her husband had moved to the neighborhood as newlyweds. He had brought them the announcement of their first child's birth, had delivered report cards and birthday party invitations as their children grew. The snow continued to fall, and Henry lifted his face to it for a moment, feeling the cold kiss of flakes on his cheeks. Then he picked up his bag, settled it back onto his shoulder, and turned onto Birch Avenue. The blue house stood halfway down the block, impossible to miss even in the falling snow. The Johnsons had painted it that particular shade of sky blue 25 years ago, and it had caused quite a stir in the neighborhood at the time. Henry had heard all about it from other residents who stopped him on his route to discuss this bold choice. Now, of course, the color was simply part of the neighborhood's character, as essential as the oak tree at the corner. He had delivered mail to this house for the entire time the Johnson family had lived there. He remembered when they first moved in, a young couple with a baby on the way. He remembered the thick manila envelope from the hospital that had contained information about prenatal classes. He had delivered the birth announcement of their daughter, Sarah. Kay had watched the progression of her life through the mail, birthday party invitations, elementary school notices, Girl Scout cookie order forms. As he approached the blue house now, he saw that someone had hung a wreath on the door, and lights had been strung along the porch railing, glowing warmly even in the daylight. The mailbox, painted to match the house, stood at the end of the driveway. Henry reached into his bag and pulled out the stack meant for the Johnsons. Several cards, small package wrapped in brown paper, a catalog. He remembered the year Sarah had started first grade. Mrs. Johnson had been nervous, had caught him on his route one morning in September and told him, unprompted, about how Sarah had cried that first morning. He had listened, understanding that sometimes people just needed to speak their worries aloud to someone who would hear them with kindness. He remembered when Sarah had graduated high school. The announcement had come through the mail, of course, and he had taken extra care with it, knowing what it represented. He had seen her grow from a child who used to run to the mailbox to check for packages, into a young woman who went off to college, whose mail shifted from schoolwork notices to student loan information and apartment lease agreements. Just last year, he had delivered her wedding invitation to her parents. The envelope had been thick, expensive, embossed with gold lettering. He had held it for a moment before placing it in the box, thinking about how strange and wonderful it was that he had witnessed this entire arc from birth to marriage, all through the simple act of delivering mail. The Johnsons' mail fit easily into their box. Henry closed it carefully, the way he closed every mailbox, with respect for the small, private space that connected each house to the larger world. He noticed that someone had placed a poinsettia on the porch, bright red against the blue paint. As he turned to leave, the front door opened, and Mrs. Johnson appeared, wrapped in a thick cardigan. Her hair had gone gray over the years, but her smile was the same one he had seen countless times. "Henry," she called out, "I was hoping I'd catch you." "Wait just a moment." She disappeared back inside, and Henry waited, watching his breath make clouds in the cold air. She returned with a small, wrapped package and a card. "We couldn't let you retire without saying thank you," she said, coming down the porch steps carefully. Snow was accumulating now, creating a thin, white layer over everything. It's 40 years. Can you imagine? You've been bringing us our mail since before Sarah was born. You're part of our family story. Henry accepted the gift with genuine gratitude, feeling the weight of it in his gloved hands. "That's very kind of you," he said. "It's been my privilege, truly. I've watched Sarah grow up through these windows. You have a beautiful family." Mrs. Johnson's eyes grew bright with emotion. "She's coming home tonight, you know, with her husband. It's our first Christmas with them as part of the family. I keep thinking about that first Christmas after she was born. How scared I was that I wouldn't know how to do any of it right. And now, here we are, and she's all grown up. And I'm going to be a grandmother in the spring." Henry smiled, deeply pleased by this news. "Congratulations. That's wonderful." "I haven't even told her yet," Mrs. Johnson said with a laugh. "I just found out yesterday, okay? But I needed to tell someone, and you were always such a good listener, Henry." They stood together for a moment in the falling snow, sharing the kind of comfortable silence that comes from years of brief but meaningful encounters. Then Mrs. Johnson patted his arm and wished him a Merry Christmas. And Henry continued on his route, carrying her gift and the knowledge of new life coming to the blue house in the spring. The snow fell more steadily now, muffling sounds, transforming the neighborhood into something softer and more dreamlike. Henry's footsteps made fresh prints on the sidewalks, and he found himself noticing details he had perhaps taken for granted before. The way each house had its own character. The care people took in their small yards, the different styles of mailboxes that ranged from simple metal affairs to elaborate wooden structures shaped like houses or barns. At the end of Birch Avenue, where it curved to meet Sycamore Lane, stood Mr. Patterson's cottage. It was a small house, almost a bungalow, with dark green shutters and a slate roof that had weathered beautifully over the decades. Mr. Patterson had lived there longer than Henry had been delivering mail, and in fact had been one of the first people to greet Henry on his very first day on the route all those years ago. He had been a middle-aged man then, a widower who lived alone but seemed content with his solitude. Now he was well into his 80s, still living independently, still maintaining his small house and his smaller garden with the same careful attention he had always shown. Henry had lost count of how many times Mr. Patterson had invited him in for a hot drink over the years. It had started early, maybe in Henry's second winter on the route. Hay had been delivering mail during a particularly brutal cold snap, and Mr. Patterson had appeared at his door as Henry approached the mailbox, insisting that he come inside for just 5 minutes to warm up. That 5-minute break had become a tradition, especially in winter, especially on difficult weather days. Mr. Patterson always had something hot ready: coffee, tea, cocoa, sometimes even soup. They would stand in his small kitchen, and Mr. Patterson would ask about the route, about the weather, about Henry's family. The conversations were never long, but they were sustaining in a way that went beyond the physical warmth of the drinks. Over the years, Henry had also taken it upon himself to check on Mr. Patterson during the harshest weather. If snow was particularly deep or ice particularly treacherous, he would make sure to see that Mr. Patterson was all right, that he had what he needed. It had never been part of his official duties, but it had been part of his personal code, his understanding of what it meant to serve a community. As Henry approached the cottage now, he saw that Mr. Patterson had shoveled his walk, though a fresh layer of snow was already beginning to cover the cleared path. Smoke rose from the chimney, gray against the white sky. The mailbox, a simple black metal affair, stood at the end of the walk. Henry was sliding Mr. Patterson's small bundle of mail into the box when he heard the front door open. Henry Whitmore. Don't you even think about leaving without saying goodbye properly. Mr. Patterson stood in his doorway, leaning slightly on a cane he had started using a few years ago. He wore a thick sweater and a smile that showed every one of his 80-some years and every bit of the warmth that had characterized their decades of acquaintance. I have cocoa made, Mr. Patterson continued, and I will be deeply offended if you don't come in for just a moment. Henry couldn't help but smile. He secured his mailbag and walked up the path to the cottage, his boots leaving clear prints in the fresh snow. The warmth hit him as soon as he stepped inside, along with the rich smell of chocolate and something baking. Mr. Patterson's kitchen was small and immaculately kept, everything in its place, everything showing the care of someone who lived alone and took pride in his space. 2 mugs sat on the counter, steam rising from them. A plate of cookies, clearly homemade, waited beside them. I knew you'd be coming today, Mr. Patterson said, handing Henry one of the mugs. Last Christmas Eve, last route, had to send you off properly. They stood in the warm kitchen, sipping cocoa, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was comfortable, earned through years of these small moments of connection. You know, Mr. Patterson finally said, when Martha passed, I thought I'd follow pretty quickly. Didn't see much point in staying around. But then, life kept happening, day after day, and you were part of that life, Henry. Every morning, like clockwork, here you came with the mail. It was something to count on, something steady. Henry felt his throat tighten. "I appreciate that more than you know," he managed to say. "I made you something," Mr. Patterson said, reaching for a small, wrapped package on the counter. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Henry opened it carefully. Inside was a hand-carved wooden bird, small enough to fit in his palm, detailed and beautiful. A chickadee, he realized, noting the distinctive black cap and white cheeks. "I took up wood carving after I retired," Mr. Patterson explained. "Keeps the hands busy. That's a chickadee, like the ones that come to my feeder. They're always here, winter and summer, reliable, like you." Henry held the small carving gently, feeling the smooth wood, the careful detail. "It's beautiful," he said. "Thank you, truly." They finished their cocoa standing in that warm kitchen while snow fell outside the window. They talked about the neighborhood, about the families that had come and gone, about the changes they had both witnessed. When Henry finally had to leave, Mr. Patterson walked him to the door, moving slowly with his cane. "Take care of yourself, Henry. Enjoy that retirement. You've earned it. You take care too," Henry said. "And if you need anything, you have my number." "I'm not going far." He walked back down the path, the carved bird safely tucked in his pocket, continued on his route with a fullness in his chest that was part sadness, part gratitude, part something he didn't quite have words for. The snow was steady now, transforming the neighborhood into a winter scene that would have looked perfect on a greeting card. Henry passed houses he had been visiting for 40 years, each one familiar, each one holding its own collection of stories and memories. The weight of his bag grew lighter with each delivery, and he found himself slowing down, wanting to savor these last hours on the route. On Sycamore Lane, he came to the Brennan house, and despite the cold and the weight of the day's emotions, he found himself smiling. The Brennans were possibly his favorite delivery challenge on the entire route, though he would never have admitted this to anyone. They had been on his route for about 15 years, and in all that time, they had never once received a normally shaped package. It had started simply enough with a long, tube-shaped delivery that had required some creative positioning to fit on their porch without rolling away. But that had been just the beginning. Over the years, Henry had delivered packages to the Brennans that defied all conventional understanding of how things should be packaged for shipping. There had been a perfect sphere that he had been genuinely afraid would roll off the porch and down the street. There had been a series of increasingly large triangular boxes that had required careful balancing. There had been something shaped like a giant number 7 that he had puzzled over for a solid minute before figuring out how to secure it. The packages were always legitimate, always properly addressed, always meant for the Brennans. He had no idea what they ordered or why everything came in such unusual shapes, but over the years, he had developed a genuine admiration for them. They were artists, he had eventually learned, which explained some of it, but not all. Their ability to consistently receive oddly shaped deliveries had become something of a personal challenge for him, a test of his professional creativity. Today's delivery to the Brennans was relatively modest by their standards. A package shaped like a hexagon, about 2 feet across, surprisingly light. He carried it up their front walk, where someone had built a small snowman, complete with a carrot nose and a jaunty scarf. Their porch was decorated with strings of lights and several wind chimes that made soft, musical sounds in the gentle winter breeze. He found the perfect spot for the hexagonal package, wedging it carefully between a planter and the wall where it would stay secure and dry. As he was arranging it, the front door opened and Mrs. Brennan appeared, wrapped in what looked like a handmade shawl covered in colorful patterns. "Henry," she exclaimed. "We were hoping to catch you. Just don't leave yet." She disappeared inside, and Mr. Brennan appeared a moment later, carrying what was unmistakably another unusually shaped package, this one wrapped in festive paper and shaped like a star. "We made you something," Mr. Brennan said, grinning. "We figured you deserved at least one weird package of your own after all the ones you've dealt with from us." Henry laughed, accepting the star-shaped gift. "I have to tell you, I've actually enjoyed the challenge." You've kept me on my toes for 15 years. We know, Mrs. Brennan said, joining her husband at the door. We've seen you out there, figuring out where to put our ridiculous packages. You've never once just left them in the snow or propped them carelessly. Okay? You always find a way to make them work. That's dedication. Or stubbornness, Henry said with a smile. But I appreciate the thought either way. The star-shaped package felt like it might contain something ceramic or wooden, something handmade. He would open it later, at home, but already he treasured it for the humor and warmth it represented. As he continued down Sycamore Lane, he found himself thinking about all the unusual deliveries he had handled over the years, all the strange shapes and sizes and weights. People ordered such odd things, and he had been the one to bring these items to their doors. Completing these small transactions of commerce and curiosity was a funny thing to feel proud of, but he did. He had been good at his job, even the challenging parts. The next street brought him to what had become, in his mind, one of the most comical, regular stops on his route. The Nelson house was a modest ranch-style home with a neat yard and an impressively large and fluffy dog named Brutus, who took his guarding duties very seriously. Brutus was a Newfoundland, which meant he was roughly the size of a small bear and covered in thick black fur that made him look even larger. He was also, despite his imposing appearance, one of the gentlest dogs Henry had ever encountered. But Brutus didn't know he was gentle. As far as Brutus was concerned, he was a fierce protector of his domain, and every delivery was a potential threat to be investigated with great seriousness. The comedy lay in the contrast. When Henry delivered something large or ordinary, Brutus would maintain his dignity, observing from a position of importance on the porch. But whenever Henry delivered something very small or very light, Brutus seemed to become convinced that the tiny package was the greatest threat of all and would need to inspect it with extra care, his massive head dwarfing whatever small item had arrived. Today's delivery was particularly amusing. A small box, no bigger than a deck of cards, weighing almost nothing. It was addressed to the Nelsons and required a signature, which meant Henry would need to approach the door while Brutus conducted his investigation. As soon as Henry opened the gate, Brutus appeared from around the side of the house, snow clinging to his dark fur. Hey, he approached with all the dignity his size afforded him, tail wagging slowly, eyes fixed on the tiny box in Henry's hand. "Hello, Brutus," Henry said, as he had said countless times before. "Got a delivery for your family. It's a very dangerous package here. Better check it carefully." Brutus sniffed the box with great concentration, his nose nearly as large as the package itself. Henry waited patiently, as he always did, while the massive dog completed his security assessment. Satisfied that the tiny box posed no immediate threat, despite its suspicious lightness, Brutus gave Henry permission to proceed to the door. Walking alongside him like an honor guard, Mrs. Nelson answered his knock, smiled at the familiar scene of her enormous dog escorting the mail carrier, and signed for the package. "Last day, isn't it?" she asked, her expression turning more serious. "It's last day," Henry confirmed. "Brutus is going to miss you," she said. "He's been doing this routine with you for, 8 years now? About that? Yes? Since he was a puppy, though calling something that size a puppy always seemed like a stretch." Mrs. Nelson laughed. "He was a puppy once, believe it or not. You were always so patient with him, even when he was young and rowdy. I remember you took the time to teach him to be gentle when you handed me packages. Most delivery people just tossed things on the porch and ran." She handed Henry a card and a gift card to a local coffee shop. "Thank you for everything, Henry, for treating our dog like he mattered, and for always treating us with such care." Brutus walked Henry back to the gate, still maintaining his protective vigil, and Henry found himself genuinely moved by the thought that even this gentle giant would notice his absence. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was also everything. Its connections, these small recognitions and routines, they had made up the texture of his working life. "Okay, The afternoon was advancing, and the snow showed no signs of stopping. The light had that particular quality of a snowy winter day, diffuse and soft, making everything seem slightly dreamlike. Henry's bag was significantly lighter now, and he knew he was entering the final stretch of his route on Elm Street. Near the end of his usual path, he came to a house that had only recently been occupied. The young couple who lived there had moved in just 3 months ago, in September. He had delivered their address, changed notification, had watched as boxes and furniture arrived, had seen them slowly settle into the neighborhood. The house itself was charming, a small cottage style with a steep roof and a stone chimney. When they had first moved in, the yard had been somewhat neglected, but over the past few months, the couple had been working on it. Even now, in winter, he could see the evidence of their care: the trimmed bushes, the repaired fence, the fresh paint on the shutters. For their first Christmas in their new home, they had decorated enthusiastically. Lights outlined the roof and windows, a wreath hung on the door, and someone had placed luminarias along the front walk. It was the decoration of people who were excited about their space, who were building something together. Henry had a small bundle of mail for them today: a few cards, a package, and what looked like a letter from a mortgage company. He approached the house, noting the warm light visible through the windows, the smoke rising from their chimney. As he was placing the mail in their box, the front door opened, and a young woman emerged, pulling a coat on as she came down the steps. She was probably in her late 20s, with bright eyes and an eager expression. "Oh, I'm so glad I caught you," she said. "You're Henry, right? The mail carrier everyone's told us about." Henry nodded, a bit surprised. "That's right. You must be Mrs. Harris." "Emma, please," she said, smiling. "Everyone in the neighborhood has mentioned you. They said you were retiring today, and my husband and I wanted to make sure we thanked you before you left." She had a card in her hand, slightly rumpled, as if she had been holding it and waiting for him. "We know you haven't been delivering to us very long, but we wanted to say thank you anyway." Moving into a new home, a new neighborhood, is exciting, but also kind of scary. And having someone like you, someone reliable and kind, who's been serving this community for so long, it's made us feel like we were moving into a place that was cared for. Does that make sense? It made perfect sense. Henry accepted the card with gratitude. "That's very thoughtful of you. How are you settling in?" "Really well," Emma said, and her face lit up. "This is actually our first house. We were in an apartment before, and everything about it feels like such an adventure. We're relearning about storm windows and furnace filters and all these things we never had to think about before, but it's good. It feels like we're building our life, you know?" Henry did know. He had seen so many young couples at this exact stage over his 40 years, so many first houses, so many new beginnings. He felt a surge of affection for this young woman and her husband, whom he could see now watching from the window, and a hope for their future here. "I can tell you take good care of the place," Henry said. "And this is a good neighborhood, good people. You'll be happy here." "We already are," Emma said. "And thank you, truly, for being part of what makes it good." As he walked away from the Harris house, Henry felt the weight of all these farewells, all these thank yous, settling into him. He had known intellectually that he had served this community for a long time, that he had been a consistent presence in people's lives. But experiencing the depth of their gratitude, hearing how his simple acts of care had mattered to them, this was something else entirely. This was the accumulation of 40 years of showing up, of paying attention, of treating every delivery and every person with respect. He had only a handful of deliveries left now, and his bag felt almost empty. The sky was darkening earlier than usual, the clouds heavy with snow, and the streetlights were beginning to come on, casting pools of warm light onto the white sidewalks. The last few houses passed in a kind of beautiful haze. Each delivery felt both ordinary and significant. He was doing exactly what he had done thousands of times before, but he was also doing it for the last time, and that dual awareness made everything feel heightened and precious. At the Ramirez house, Mr. Ramirez was outside scraping ice from his windshield and called out a thank you. At the O'Brien residence, someone had left a small gift bag hanging on the mailbox with his name on it. At the Cooper place, lights blazed in every window, and he could hear Christmas music playing, could see shadows of people moving inside, preparing for their holiday celebration. As he approached what would be his final delivery, the very last house on his route, he found that a small crowd had gathered. Neighbors from up and down the street, people he had served for years or even decades, standing in the snow, waiting for him. Someone started clapping, and then others joined in, and Henry found himself walking toward them through a gentle snowfall while they applauded, their breath making clouds in the cold air, their faces lit with genuine appreciation and affection. Mrs. Johnson was there from the Blue House, and Mr. Patterson leaning on his cane, and the Brennans, and Emma and her husband from their first house, and Mrs. Nelson with Brutus on a leash, and so many others. They had come out in the snow on Christmas Eve to say goodbye to their mail carrier, and Henry felt his eyes sting with tears that had nothing to do with the cold. They gave him cards and small gifts. They shook his hand and hugged him. They told him stories about times he had gone out of his way to help them, moments he had barely remembered, but that they had treasured. Mrs. Chen from Sycamore Lane reminded him of the time he had noticed her mail piling up during a week when she had been hospitalized, and how he had called the post office to make sure someone checked on her house. He had forgotten doing that, but she never had. The Morrison family was there, and even they had brought their stern-faced garden gnome, carrying it out to the sidewalk. "We know you two had your differences," Mr. Morrison said with a grin, but he wanted to say goodbye too. Henry laughed, genuinely touched by the absurdity and sweetness of the gesture. "We've made our peace," he told the gnome solemnly, and everyone laughed, the sound warm and bright in the cold evening air. Someone had brought thermoses of hot chocolate, and paper cups were passed around. Tea. They stood together in the falling snow. This collection of people whose only real connection was that they lived on the same streets and had all been served by the same mail carrier for decades. But standing there together, it felt like more than that. It felt like community, like the invisible threads that connected all their lives had become visible for just this moment. "Speech," someone called out, and others took up the cry. "Speech, Henry." He hadn't prepared anything to say. He had thought this last route would be a solitary walk, a private goodbye to the work he had loved. But this was better, so much better than anything he could have imagined. "I don't know what to say," he began, his voice rough with emotion. "Except, thank you. I came to work every day for 40 years, and I thought I was just delivering mail. But you've shown me that it was more than that. You've shown me that showing up matters, that consistency matters, that small acts of care add up to something larger." He paused, looking at their faces, these people he had known for so long. "I got to watch your children grow up. I got to witness your lives through the mail you received, the good news and the hard news, the celebrations and the struggles. It's been an honor. It's the greatest honor of my life to serve you all." More applause, and then people began to drift away, heading back to their warm houses, to their Christmas Eve preparations. But they each stopped to say a final goodbye, to shake his hand one more time, to wish him well in his retirement. When the street had finally emptied and the last neighbor had returned home, Henry stood alone in the falling snow, his mailbag truly empty now, lighter than it had been in 40 years. He looked up and down the street, at the houses glowing with light and life, at the snow-covered sidewalks where he had walked so many miles, and he felt a profound sense of completion. The walk back to the post office was quiet. The snow muffled all sound, and the neighborhood had settled into its Christmas Eve evening. Families were gathering. Meals were being prepared. Children were being reminded that Santa wouldn't come until they were asleep. The ordinary magic of the holiday was unfolding in every house and Henry had been part of making that possible, part of the infrastructure of connection that allowed people to send and receive their cards, their gifts, their expressions of love across distances. The post office was nearly empty when he arrived. Most of the carriers had finished their routes hours ago and gone home. Patricia was still there, though, finishing some paperwork, and she looked up when he came in. "How was it?" she asked softly. "It was perfect," Henry said. "They all came out to say goodbye. The whole neighborhood, it seemed like." She smiled, her eyes bright. "That's because they loved you, Henry. Because you loved them first." In your way, he removed his mailbag for the final time, feeling strange without its familiar weight. He hung it on its designated hook, his hands lingering on the worn leather for just a moment. Then he signed out, completed the last of his paperwork, and turned in his keys and identification badge. Tom, the postmaster, shook his hand one final time. "The door's always open if you want to visit," he said, "and we'll be calling on you for the holiday rush, if you're willing." "We'll see," Henry said, smiling. "I might need to remember what sleeping past 5 in the morning feels like first." The walk to his car felt strange. He had walked to and from the post office on his route countless times, but always with purpose, always with the work ahead of him or behind him. Kana, he was simply walking. His shift ended not for the day, but forever. The drive home took him through parts of his neighborhood, and he noticed things with fresh eyes. The work he had done had been bounded by his route, but its effects had rippled outward, had been part of the larger fabric of the community. Every house he passed held people who depended on mail carriers like him, who needed that connection to the broader world that mail represented. His own house appeared in the beam of his headlights, modest and welcoming, decorated with the simple lights his wife had strung along the porch railing. He could see her silhouette in the kitchen window, and his chest tightened with love and gratitude. She had supported this work for 40 years, had understood his dedication to it, had never complained about the early mornings or the long hours during the holiday season. He parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. In his pocket, he could feel Mr. Patterson's carved chickadee, and in his car he had the collection of gifts and cards from his route. Each one represented a connection, a moment of recognition, a small acknowledgement that his work had mattered. As he walked up to his own front door, he passed his mailbox, and something made him stop. He opened it, curious, and found a single envelope inside. His name was written on it in his wife's familiar handwriting. Inside the house, he hung up his coat and called out to her. She appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel, her face soft with understanding. "How was your last day?" she asked. "Beautiful," he said simply. "Perfect." He held up the envelope. "Did you leave this for me?" She nodded. "I wanted you to have the experience, at least once, of finding a letter in your own mailbox. You've spent 40 years filling everyone else's, after all." He opened it carefully. Inside was a card, and his wife's handwriting filled the space. "Dear Henry, for 40 years, I've watched you leave every morning with dedication and return every evening with stories. You served this community with such care, such consistency, such quiet excellence. You made your work into an art form, and you made every person on your route feel seen and valued. I'm so proud of you, not just for the 40 years, but for every single day within them. For every time you went out in terrible weather, every time you made sure someone was okay, every time you treated a simple delivery like it mattered, because, to you, it always did. Now it's time to rest, time to enjoy the mornings without an alarm, the winters without worry, the freedom to simply be. You've earned it 1,000 times over. I love you, and I'm so grateful to share this next chapter with you. Always." Margaret Henry read it twice, feeling the weight of her love and understanding, feeling the transition from one part of his life to another become real and right. He looked up at his wife, this woman who had been his partner through all of it, and found he didn't need to say anything. She understood, as she always had. "Okay, They ate dinner together that Christmas Eve, a simple meal that felt luxurious because Henry wasn't exhausted from his route. Afterward, they sat in the living room with the lights from their Christmas tree casting soft colors across the walls, and Henry opened the gifts his neighbors had given him. From the Johnsons, a photo album filled with pictures of their family over the years, with a note thanking him for being part of their story. It's from Mr. Patterson, the carved chickadee which Henry placed on the mantle where he could see it every day. From the Brennans, a small sculpture made from twisted wire and found objects, somehow both abstract and perfectly recognizable as a mail carrier with a bag. It's from Emma and her husband, a framed print of their street, painted in watercolors, showing the houses and trees in summer glory. Each gift was thoughtful, personal, chosen with care. Together, they represented 40 years of relationship, mutual respect and affection, built through the simple, repeated act of delivering mail with dedication. As the evening grew late and the snow continued to fall outside, Henry found himself thinking about all the routes he had walked, all the steps he had taken, all the mail he had delivered. Millions of pieces over 40 years. Millions of small connections made, millions of tiny moments of service that had accumulated into something profound. He thought about the children he had watched grow up, about the elderly people he had checked on, about the young couples just starting out. He thought about the mail he had delivered that had carried good news and bad, that had connected people across distances, that had been mundane or momentous or anything in between. And he understood, finally and fully, what his work had been about. It hadn't been about the mail itself, not really. It had been about showing up, about being reliable, about treating every task, every person, every moment with care and attention. It had been about being part of the invisible infrastructure of community, the countless small actions that hold a neighborhood together. His life of service had created this web of connection, had touched more lives than he could count, not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through 40 years of simply doing his job well, with kindness, with consistency, with dedication. Margaret had fallen asleep in her chair, and Henry covered her gently with a blanket. He stood at the window, looking out at the snow-covered street, at the houses where lights still glowed, where families were celebrating, where his former neighbors were living their lives. Tomorrow, he would wake without an alarm. He would have coffee, slowly, read the newspaper, perhaps work in a small workshop, or visit with friends. The days ahead would be his own, unscheduled, open. It should have felt frightening, this vast openness after 40 years of rigid routine, but instead, it felt like a gift, earned and deserved. He had given his working life to service, and that service had been returned to him 100-fold in gratitude and connection and meaning. He had been just a mail carrier, but in being that faithfully and well, he had been part of something larger. He had mattered. His work had mattered. His presence in people's lives had mattered. As he turned from the window and moved toward bed, Henry felt a deep peace settle over him. It's a kind of peace that comes from a life lived with purpose, from work done well, from service rendered faithfully. He had walked his last route, delivered his last piece of mail, closed his mailbag for the final time. But the connections he had made, the lives he had touched, the community he had served, these would continue. These would ripple forward, beyond his route, beyond his retirement, beyond even his life. Because kindness creates kindness. Because showing up matters. Because a life of simple, dedicated service creates a legacy that extends far beyond the simple delivery of mail. In the morning, his neighbors would wake to find their Christmas cards and packages, would open gifts and celebrate with family. And while they might miss seeing Henry on his route, they would carry forward the lessons he had taught them simply by being consistent, by being kind, by caring about work that others might have considered mundane. That was enough. That was everything. Henry climbed into bed beside his sleeping wife, listening to the soft sound of snow against the windows, feeling the warmth of his home around him. Tomorrow was Christmas Day. Tomorrow was the first day of his retirement. Tomorrow was the beginning of whatever came next. But tonight, he was simply Henry Whitmore, tired mail carrier who had spent 40 years walking the same route with dedication and care, who had been present for countless small moments in countless lives, who had learned that the most ordinary work, done with love and attention, becomes extraordinary. He closed his eyes, and sleep came easily, the sleep of someone who has earned their rest, who has given fully of themselves, who has lived a life of meaning, measured not in grand achievements, but in daily kindnesses and consistent presence and simple service, rendered well. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering his footprints on the sidewalks, blanketing the neighborhood in white. But the paths he had walked for 40 years remained invisible but real, written into the memory of the community, woven into the fabric of all those lives he had touched. And that, Henry thought, as he drifted into sleep, was the most beautiful gift of all. If this story resonated with you, if it brought you a moment of peace or helped you reflect on the quiet acts of service in your own life, please consider showing your support with a like and subscribe to Deep Sleep Stories Hub for more quiet nights and restful journeys. May your rest be deep, and may you wake refreshed, carrying forward the knowledge that every small act of kindness matters. Every moment of consistency builds something beautiful, and every life lived with dedication and care creates ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Good night, and sleep well.